Hello everyone, my name is Elaine Walsh and I'm a Senior Executive Planner in the Planning Policy Unit of Cork County Council. So just want to welcome you all to our webinar on the Draft County Development Plan. And thanks for taking the time to engage with us today. In terms of the running order, we're going to start off with a welcome message from our Chief Executive, Tim Lucy. And then we'll move on to a presentation then and a question and answer session with Padraig Moore, who's the Senior Planner in the Planning Policy Unit. Just a little reminder in terms of housekeeping that we're using listening mode today for the webinar, but you can interact with us on the question and answer function. So just pop any questions that you have in there. We'll try and answer some in the chat, but also Padraig will deal with some of the questions then at the end of his presentation. So we'll just get the ball rolling, and as I said, I'll just play a welcome message there from Tim Lucy, Chief Executive.
Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on the Draft County Development Plan 2022 to 2028. This is the first of three county development plans that will guide the future growth of Cork County up to 2040 and is based on the very ambitious targets set out in the National Planning Framework and the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy for the Southern Region for Cork County. The plan provides up to 2028 for population growth of 61,000 persons, supported by housing output of up to 29,300 housing units. In addition, it supports the development of up to 36,500 new employment spaces to support the ever-increasing population and attractiveness of Cork County as a place to live in and to work in, and indeed to enjoy Cork as a place of your life. The plan, I suppose, has been developed over a very extensive period of informal public consultations, but in particular in conjunction with our elected members of council. Between our elected members and ourselves and the executive side, we've had up to 46 formal meetings on the development of both the policy development across employment, environment, community, employment and residential growth, etc. But also in looking at the zoning objectives for the entirety of our land base across the entire county. The zoning quantums inside this plan provide for just over 850 hectares of residential land, but also up to 2,000 hectares of employment land, which will provide an adequate level of flexibility for investors and people and anybody associated with the development of the growth of our county to have choice over the next 6 years. The plan is clearly underpinned by a very significant infrastructure investment programme, which we ourselves, in conjunction with our state partners, are key to delivering to support investment over the next 6-year period. I'm satisfied that with an all-of-government approach and the very ambitious targets set out again in the NPF and indeed supported by the National Development Plan, that we can achieve that level of growth for what is the most superb county and location in Ireland in which to reside and which to do business in. We look forward to working with you on that. We look forward to you engaging fully with this particular process. The process will conclude in April 2022, but this next period up to July 1st is probably one of the more critical ones, where we invite you to make your submissions on any aspect of policy, any aspect of our objectives, or any aspect of life in Cork County. We will take those on board in conjunction with our elected members and thereafter review and go back out with whatever amendments are required to our plan back out in later this year. Thank you for participating, and we look forward to working in conjunction with all of you across all of our communities, coastal, marine, rural, towns, metropolitan Cork, etc., in driving the growth of Cork County. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Tim Lucy, Chief Executive. So we'll just move on to the main content of the webinar today, and Padraig is going to give us a presentation covering the main topics of the draft plan.
Thanks very much, Elaine, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this webinar, and hopefully you will find it both helpful and informative. I'll just put up the presentation now, so hopefully everything will work accordingly. Okay, and just give it a second. Yeah, and as the Chief Executive said, this draft plan aims to provide a clear roadmap for County Cork to show how we intend to meet the ambitious targets set out in national policy to deliver the 61,000 population growth, the over 29,000 homes and the 36,000 jobs between now and 2028. The draft plan has been prepared in the midst of dealing with the pandemic and Brexit, while setting out a pathway at a County Cork level to deal with the significant challenges of the ongoing housing crisis and the global challenges of climate disruption and biodiversity loss. Against this backdrop, the draft plan sets out the policies and objectives at a strategic level, which will guide the county to 2028, taking a significant step towards meeting our longer-term 2040 commitments. Over the next 45-50 minutes, I hope to give you a broad overview of the key policies at a strategic level in the draft plan, which will assist you in making a submission and contributing to the makeup of the final adopted plan and having your say. If you have any questions, please send them in as we go through the presentation, and we will endeavour to answer them as we go along. And there will also be an opportunity, as Elaine said, at the end of this presentation for further Q&A. So we'll move on then to the presentation. And I suppose the first thing to say is that this draft county development plan sets out a new approach to statutory planning in the county. It's different from previous county development plans in a number of areas, but two of the key ones are that it's the first county development plan for the new administrative area of Cork County after the city boundary extension. And also this county development plan will not only replace or review the 2014 County Development Plan, but it also involves a review of the current municipal district local area plans, all 8 of them, adopted in 2017, and the 9 former town council development plans, which date from around 2009-2010. So what we'll have in effect is one set of statutory documents dealing with all planning issues in the county. And as you can see there, the new plan consists of 7 volumes. Volume 1 is main policy material, Volume 2 is heritage and amenity, Volume 3 is North Cork, and that includes all the settlements within the Fermoy and the Conturk-Mallow MD municipal districts. Volume 4 is South Cork, which includes Carrigaline municipal district, Cove, East Cork and Macroom, and all the settlements within those. Volume 5 deals with West Cork, and that's the Banning-Kinsale Municipal District and the West Cork Municipal District. Volume 6 contains the environmental reports, the Strategic Environmental Assessment, the Habitats Directive Assessment and the Strategic Flood Risk Assessment. Volume 7 is the Map Browser, and it's an interactive online tool to allow you to drill in and look at the policy maps that are in the other volumes at a much more detailed level, switch on and turn off layers as you go along. And we'll touch on all of these chapters as we go through this presentation. I suppose one of the key benefits of including all the settlements in the county development plan is it allows for strategic issues and their local implications to be considered in the same process. So I just this gives an overview of the timeline. We are here at the draft plan public consultation for 10 weeks up to midnight on the 1st of July. So there's still plenty of time to get submissions in. Once the 1st of July comes up, we will then prepare a Chief Executive's report, and that will be submitted on all the submissions received, setting out the Chief Executive's recommendations and responses to those. That will be submitted to our elected members in the end of September, and they will consider that then all the way through to December. At that stage, then we will prepare proposed amendments to the draft plan, and they will go out for public consultation for 4 weeks from the 18th of January to the 15th of February. And at that stage, there'll be an opportunity to make submissions on the proposed amendments. There'll then be another Chief Executive's report on the submissions received during this public consultation, and that will be submitted to our elected members in March of 2022. The members then will adopt the plan by the 25th of April 2022, and the plan will come into effect 6 weeks later on the 6th of June 2022, and it'll be the 2022 to 2028 County Development Plan. So how do you have your say in this very important document, and very important for the life of the county over the next 6 to 8 years? Firstly, where can you access the documents? We have a web page, and I'd encourage people to go into the web page, and there's a lot of very useful documentation there. All the volumes are featured, and there's a series of guidelines and so on, and we'll touch on those further as we go through the presentation. The documents themselves are available to review at the Planning Department Floor 1 in County Hall, in Norton House, and also in the Divisional Office in Annabella. And all our county and branch libraries have copies of the plan, and they're available to view in the libraries. Our web page, as I mentioned already, all the documentation published in the draft plan to date, in both on the pre-draft stage and in stage 2 draft plan, are available to review and view there on the document. We also have a virtual room which gives access to volumes 1 to 7 and to try and encourage further participation. We have a number of other documents. We have a Have Your Say document which outlines how you get involved in the process, how to make a submission, and so on. We have a significant list of FAQs which would help people with any questions they may have, and then there's a series of useful links as well to other documents, including the current county development plan, the current local area plans, and the town council plans. We also have certain extracts of the plan translated into Irish, and there's a button there which translates the website and the other documentation into Irish, so there's an Irish version. The web page also features the online submission system, and we would encourage people to use the online submission system as much as possible. There's also guidance on how to make an online submission, and we'd encourage people to read that before making an online submission. Our contact details are set out there. We'd encourage people, if you have any queries having read the documents, in the first instance to ring us, and we'll try and answer any queries you may have. We also have an email address which is set out there, and as I said before, the FAQs will give good advice on how to access the documents and how to have your say in making a submission. Making a submission itself, you have until midnight on Thursday the 1st of July. So there's still plenty of time, but don't leave it until the last few days, because it gets very, very busy in the last few days. So I'd encourage people who are intending on making a submission to do so as soon as possible. And a submission can be made, as I say, using the online submission system, and there's good guidance on that. Or alternatively, you can pop it in the post and send it to the Senior Planner, Planning Policy Unit, Cork County Council, Floor 13, County Hall, Cork. We don't accept email submissions, so the submission has to be through the online submission system or in the post. They're the only two ways of making a submission, so don't send email submission to us. And just to note that all submissions received are available to view online through the council's website, yourcouncil.ie, within 10 working days of the submission being submitted to us. So you go into the Your Council tab on the council's webpage, go to View Submissions, and then Planning Policy Consultations, and if you have a name or reference number, all the submissions are available there within 10 working days of receiving them. So moving on then to look at some of the key policies in the document itself. The main body of the document, or the strategic policy, is set out in Volume 1 Main Policy Material, and there's 19 chapters there in that. I suppose it's important to note that the whole planning policy context has changed utterly since we did our last statutory plans in 2017, the local area plans. We now have the National Planning Framework, which came into effect in February 2018. We have the Southern Region Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy, the REES, and within that the Cork Metropolitan Area Strategic Plan, which deals with Metropolitan Cork and the City, which came into effect in January 2020. We have a whole range of Section 28 guidelines, and some of the more recent ones include specific planning policy requirements, or SPPRs. One of the most recent guidelines that was issued by the department was the Housing Supply Target Methodology for Development Planning in December 2020, or HST, and it set out a new approach to turning your population targets into houses and so on. So it has a significant impact on how we approach the preparation of our core strategy, and we'll come back to that later on. Our draft plan must be consistent with the NPF and the REIS and MASP. We have to have regard to Section 28 guidelines, and where those guidelines include an SPPR, we have to comply. The other change in the planning policy landscape is the advent of the Office of the Planning Regulator. And one of the roles of the Planning Regulator is to check that our draft plan is consistent with the NPF and the REIS, has regard to the various Section 28 guidelines, and where SPPRs occur, that we're complying with them. And in due course, they'll be making a submission along with everyone else to the draft plan with their views on how well we did that. So moving on then, one of the big issues, if you've had a look at the plan, is the impact or the changes to the amount of residentially zoned land within the county. And we'll be touching on that when we come to talk about the core strategy. But some of the key issues are some of the influences are the fact that a certain amount of land has been developed since the local area plans in 2017. So zoned lands have been developed. Previous growth figures and the amount of zoned land were based on an 11-year period, 2011 to 2022. This is compared to this plan where we're covering a period of 8 years. The NPF and the REIS set population targets for 2026, 2031 and 2040, and this covers 3 plan cycles. So this is the first step. Previously, we would have, if we'd known what our target was for 2040, we'd have zoned enough land now to meet that target. But in the new planning regulatory landscape, we are now going to, rather than taking 1 step, we're going to take 3 steps. So this development plan, the 22 to 28 plan, is the first step. This will be followed by the 28 to 34 plan, and then by the 34 to 40 plan. So in 3 steps, we'll reach and meet our 2040 commitments. The NPF puts a significant emphasis on delivering 30% of housing on built footprint sites where they can deliver compact growth. So that has a significant impact on the amount of greenfield land that's required across the county. We also have to, based on the Sustainable Development in Urban Areas guidelines, there's now a 2009 expectation of a higher yields from residential sites. So we've had to adjust the yield. So obviously the higher the density per hectare, the less zoned land you require. So that has had an impact. The NPF also requires that specific provision for rural housing must be accounted for in the core strategy. So that takes a part of the growth as well. All zoned land has to be assessed with regard to Appendix 3 of the NPF and tiering applied. And this relates to the availability or otherwise of infrastructure. Generally, sites that do not fall within Tier 1 or Tier 2 have not been zoned in this plan. Tier 1 is lands that have infrastructure in place and are ready to go, and this is usually water services, roads, public transport. And Tier 2 are lands that have some deficit, but we're confident that that deficit can be overcome in the lifetime of the plan, up to 2028. The final point there is headroom. The NPF and REIS figures include headroom. In the NPF and the REIS, the headroom is built into the population targets that have been allocated to each local authority. Previously, we would have, if we needed 100 hectares, we would have zoned 150 hectares. But now that's 150% of our requirement. And that was to cover the 9 years. So you had 6 years of the plan period plus 3 years. The new approach, the headroom is built into the population targets. So if you need 100 hectares, you zone 100 hectares. So that too has had an impact on the amount of residentially zoned land that we require across the county. So as I said earlier, the volume 1 consists of 19 chapters, and this is we'll be going through these and touching on some of the main issues in them as we go along. So that's the first 10, and then that's the balance. So also within volume 1, there's a series of appendices. Appendix A is the ministerial guidelines and a list of the SPPRs that we have considered in the preparation of the draft plan. Appendix B is the core strategy tables. There's 5 of them in total, and they form the core and of the core strategy, and they set out in detail the amount of population growth, the number of households, the number of houses, and the amount of residentially zoned land that we need in all of our main towns and the population growth and houses target for all of our smaller settlements. Appendix C is the core strategy statements, and these set out the justification for the allocation of the growth within the core strategy tables. Appendix D identifies the critical infrastructure required in order to deliver the targets set out in the core strategy and the core strategy tables. Appendix E is the joint housing strategy policy objectives from our joint housing strategy, and they feed into the preparation of the core strategy. Appendix F is the landscape character assessment, which is part of the preparation of the plan and sets out the different landscape character areas across the county. Appendix G is the key indicators for monitoring. It's a critical area. Once we've adopted a plan, we have to make sure that we're implementing it, and we need indicators to measure that. Appendix H is just for information so that people will know the composition of the different municipal districts, because municipal district boundaries adjust for electoral reasons on a fairly regular basis. So moving on then to Chapter 1, Introduction, Context and Vision. This sets out the plan making process, some of the legislative background. We've mentioned the environmental reports already, so it sets out that the plan is subject to those. The layout of the plan, the strategic context, the MPF, the REAST, the MASP, the key towns, the whole of Cork approach, the impacts of climate change and UN sustainability goals, and how we fit in with all these things. Some of the challenges to plan preparation, the census, Brexit, and of course the pandemic, and then it explains what strategic planning areas are. And strategic planning areas are Cork County Council creation, where they allow us to divide the county up into different pieces which don't change from plan to plan, so we can compare our statistics from one plan to another. And as you see here, we have 4 of them. We have the County Metropolitan Cork Strategic Planning Area, which is County Metropolitan Cork. We have the Greater Cork Ring, and the ring towns, the 6 ring towns within that. We then have the North Cork Strategic Planning Area, and then the West Cork Strategic Planning Area. And they allow us to set out our strategy on a sub-regional basis based on the 4 strategic planning areas. So moving on to further information in the introduction, context and vision. We set out 5 principles of quality of life, sustainability, climate action, social inclusion, placemaking and resilience. We have 10 development plan aims which are set out, and then we have the vision. And the vision is to provide for the development of County Cork as an attractive, competitive and sustainable place to live, visit and do business, where the quality of its economy, natural and built environment, culture and the strength and viability of its rural and urban communities are to the highest standards. So moving on then to the core strategy, and the core strategy, as I mentioned earlier, is the heart of the draft plan and of the final plan. It sets out the population targets for the county as a whole, for each strategic planning area, and then for each main town, key village and so on down through the settlement network. It then shows how many houses at all those levels, how many households, how many houses, the amount of zoned land required, and whether it's tier 1 or tier 2, the residentially zoned lands. And as it says there, the central focus of the core strategy is on residential development and ensuring that there is an acceptable equilibrium between the supply of zoned service land for the projected demand for new housing over the lifetime of the plan. And some of the key elements in the preparation of the core strategy are an overview of population growth, the population targets for the core strategy as set out in the NPF and the REAST, housing completions, how many houses have we completed to date over the last few years, because that's an important consideration, an evaluation of housing demand over the planned period, and the housing targets then for the core strategy. And we've mentioned the tiered approach which must be applied to our residential land use zoning. And just some of the key high-level numbers and population growth. The REAST sets out that we have to grow by, the population is expected to grow by 45,000. That's our population target to 2026. The 66,000 to 2031, and then the balance of up to 104,000 by 2040. And as you can see, the population growth up to 104,000 has been front-loaded into the earlier period of the 20 years of the MPF. What this means then for this draft plan is that the population of the county at the moment is 332,015. Sorry, that's in 2016. We expect it to grow to 392,929 by 2028, and that's a population growth of just under 61,000. So as you can see, we've pushed the envelope as near as we can to the 2031 target, even though our headline period for our plan is Q2 of 2028. So this just breaks down something I mentioned earlier, in that we're going to take 3 plan cycles to get to our 2040 target. So that's our 2016 population, and as we move through the 3 plan cycles, we'll end up in 2040. So these 2 tables just show that the second table here shows the growth that we need to achieve on an annual basis, the population growth, in order to meet those targets. And you can see there to 26 is 1.28%, to 31 is 1.21, and to 2040 is 1.15 per annum. This compares with the average growth rate nationally of 1.10 in 2017, and the European average, which is considerably lower and is almost stagnant at 0.30%. And while these are ambitious targets, as the Chief Executive said, you can see from the first table here that we have managed those targets before and considerably exceeded them over different periods, as you see there. And on average, since 1951, Cork County has grown by 1.3% per annum. So we're well capable of, again, meeting those targets and exceeding them. This shows house completions from 2011 all the way through to Q3 of 2020. And as you can see in the downturn, the housing crisis, we dropped down to a low in 2013, and we've had a steady increase since, up to about 1,400 in 2019, and I think it was something similar in 2020. But obviously the pandemic had an impact, and the pandemic will have an impact in 2021 as well. Hopefully not too much. The importance, I suppose, of these numbers is that in order to meet our 2028 targets, we need to be delivering between 3,000 and 3,500 units per annum, year in, year out. So we've a bit of work to get from 1,400, which where we were in 2019, up to the 3,500 per annum, in order to meet the requirements for housing across the county. So we've evaluated housing demand. We've carried out a joint housing strategy and a joint housing needs demand assessment to drill down at in the county's case, a strategic planning area level into what is our housing demand. We've set our housing targets. We've assumed a household size of 2.63 for the county in 2028. In 2016 it was 2.81, and in 2011 it was 2.81, and previous to that, I think with one exception since the foundation of the state, average household size has been declining. And where you pitch average household size has significant impact on the amount of units that you require. We're assuming that household formation will pick up again and we'll have more households, and therefore the average household size will fall from 2.81 down to 2.63 between now and 2028. We looked at vacancy at a strategic planning area level, as there's always a certain number of vacant houses, and took those into account. We looked at various mechanisms throughout the plan, and it comes up in different chapters how we're going to deliver compact growth, or 30% of our housing needs on the built footprint. We looked at as flexible an approach as possible to housing density. The impacts of the pandemic were considered, and the tiered approach. One of the key documents was the housing supply target methodology, and which I mentioned already in these guidelines, and these guidelines are intended to assist in providing the required consistent and coherent approach to be taken by planning authorities in incorporating national and regional population and housing projections into their statutory plans. And in section 4 of the guidelines, there's a methodology for the application of the MPF population and housing projections into local authority plan processes. And then there's an appendix, Appendix 1, which is projected housing demand by local authority area 2020 to 2031 ESRI MPF scenario housing supply target. And within that, there is a table 14, which sets out the population targets and households for County Cork. And here's a copy of table 14, and the bottom line is 29,000 units between 2020 and 2031. So that's what the housing supply target methodology sets out for Cork County. This is a table, if you walk through the methodology, I don't intend to go through it in this forum, but the bottom line is that having considered and applied the A, B, C, D, and then the F, the E and the F requirements, and we've come up with a figure of just 29,300 units. And that's the number that we're planning to deliver and planning for and zoning for in our draft development plan. And this translates then, and this is the core strategy table. Again, it's broken down at the 4 strategic planning areas. And I'll just go through along the bottom line for our purposes today. So we have the 61,000 population growth. We have total households of 30,346, the 29,300 units that we require to be delivered. Of that 29,300 units, 3,500 will be delivered in the built footprint, 18,500 on zoned land, mostly the yellow residentially zoned land, but some special policy areas. And of that, and to deliver that 18,487, we need 836 hectares of zoned land. And that breaks down Tier 1, 329, Tier 2, 507. If you add 18 to 35, 18.5 to 35, you get around 22,000. The balance of about 7,000 are accommodated within the smaller villages across the county and the rural areas. So together they all add up to 29,300. So in allocating the 29,300, we found that this didn't keep all of our urban expansion areas across in metropolitan Cork in play. And you see them there. There's Waterrock in Middleton, Carricktool North, Cove, and our Menard Strategic Development Zone. And given that these sites are delivering 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 units and up to 5,000 units, the 6-year plan cycle is too short in order to plan and deliver these, particularly to plan and deliver the infrastructure and support the infrastructure investment. So in order, so therefore these need a longer lead-in time and a longer delivery time, which is 6 years is too short. So therefore we have, in order to keep them in play, we've added additional growth from the 2028 to 2031 period in order to make sure that these remain in play, because they're a key part of the delivery of our housing supply, particularly in metropolitan Cork. So these are a series of tables then that I mentioned already from Appendix B for each of the 4 strategic planning areas, and they set out the growth, the population target, total households, new units required, new units from the built footprint, for zone sites, the amount of zoned land required, and the Tier 1 and Tier 2 for all of our main towns, our key villages over 1,500, and then all our other settlements. This is a shortened version of the table, but the full table is in Appendix B of Volume 1 of the draft plan. And the same goes for the other 4 strategic planning areas. We also set out in the core strategy a piece on the settlement network, our metropolitan towns, key towns, ring towns, county towns, key villages, West Cork Island community villages and other locations. As part of the work of the draft plan, we did a review of our settlement network and some of our smaller settlements, particularly our village nuclei and some of our smaller villages and some of our other locations. We removed the development boundary and so forth, don't feature in the draft plan. And the main reason for that is we assessed their water services capacity, and in many cases they were very limited or no capacity in a lot of cases, and therefore they wouldn't be able to contribute very much, if any, to the amount of housing required. So therefore we've distributed in this draft plan, we put our housing or allocated our growth to the settlements where we think has the best chance of delivery between now and 2028. That doesn't mean that won't change as we go along, but that's the approach we've taken at this stage in the preparation of the draft plan. There's a whole series of other policy considerations which are referenced in the core strategy, and they're set out there. Retail, rural housing, economic development, environmental, climate change, transport, marine spatial planning, and we'll touch on these in the other chapters of the plan. I suppose a critical part of the core strategy and of the plan overall is implementation and delivery. So we put a big emphasis on this. Who are the actors, in particular the key infrastructure stakeholders like Irish Water, NTA, TII, and so on. They have to row in behind us and put their shoulder to the wheel in order to deliver the ambitious targets set out in our core strategy. We've identified the critical infrastructures I mentioned already, and how are we going to fund that? And we set out broadly how this could be funded. We've looked at housing implementation mechanisms. How are we going to deliver our housing? Key active land management mechanisms like the vacant site levy on residential land, and development plan cycles, and what it all means, and how we can move forward and deliver the land. And as mentioned, the active land management approach, once the plan is adopted, active land management will be critical in ensuring that the lands that we have identified growth, that they go and deliver growth. And we've undertaken that if they're not delivering growth, then we're prepared to vary the plan and bring back proposals to our elected members to address those issues. So moving on then to settlements and placemaking. This is a new concept and a new chapter that wasn't in the previous plan, but given that our settlements are now all our settlements are now contained within our county development plan, we felt it was important to have a chapter dedicated to settlements and placemaking. In this, we set out the network and the role of settlements within the county, the placemaking approach in line with the NPF and the REIS, and we set out what placemaking is, and the diagram there shows very well the various elements of placemaking. And placemaking, if you have good placemaking, then you will deliver sustainable communities, and that's both for urban communities and rural communities. This chapter also sets out an understanding of the urban structures of our settlements. There's pieces on movement and public realm, encouraging the delivery of sustainable and resilient places, and looking at some of what's out there that works. Cork is unique, I think, in having a very strong settlement network already, and we just need to build on that and make the best use of it. There's piece on density and residential mix and building typologies, planning for culture and creativity, rural placemaking and design standards tool in order to improve the quality of our urban areas and of our buildings. Chapter 4 then, there's two parts to this. The first part deals with the joint housing strategy and the housing need demand assessment and the various trends on house completions in Cork, and there's obviously a strong relationship between this chapter and the core strategy chapter. It looks at land for social and affordable housing for any development over 10 units, and at the moment it's 10%, soon to be 20% once the new guide or the new legislation is published. We looked at specialist housing requirements through the joint housing strategy, housing need demand assessment, and we'll update that once the draft housing strategy is completed. We looked at housing for older people, in particular section 4.5 and object to HOU 4.3 sets out our aspirations there. We also looked at housing mix and meeting the requirements of all the different groups of people who are looking for housing, and that's set out in section 4.6 and objective HOU 4.6a and B in chapter 4. The second part of chapter 4 deals with the residential density and the county's approach to the settlement hierarchy and the application of housing density. It's our approach to higher density approach in villages, and the approach to density within land zoned existing residential and mixed residential and other uses. So there's lots of guidance on the appropriate density standard to apply. On brownfield sites and regeneration, we also have a piece on building height and mix, and a piece on delivering increased density. But I suppose the key thing from a density point of view is that we've tried to be as flexible as possible while having regard to the density guidelines, while at the same time taking into consideration viability of delivering housing. which is critical, as we mentioned earlier. So we've adopted a different approach for different levels and different size of settlements in order to try and accommodate all the housing requirements of everybody across the board, with the aim of, no matter what type of house you're looking for, there is somewhere within the settlement network that you can be accommodated. Chapter 5 then deals with rural. It gives an overview of national and regional policy in the MPF and the REIS. Rural policy continues to be based on the Sustainable Rural Housing Guidelines 2005, and it distinguishes between urban and rural generated need. There's no proposed change to our rural area types compared to the 2014 plan, and the policy who qualifies has been slightly amended in some cases to reflect clarifications which have come out from during the application of the current policy. Those include clarification of what we mean by nearby landholding, part-time farmers, returning immigrants. We have amended an objective on small-scale agri-tourism accommodation to make it more flexible, amended approach to derelict and replacement dwellings, now dealt with separately, and we have a new section on new uses for disused or derelict farm buildings. But broadly speaking, the rural housing policy and the qualifying applicants and so on that's in the current County Development Plan 2014 has been brought into the draft plan with only limited changes. And that's just the rural area types, which people will be familiar with, and we're not proposing any change at this stage in the draft plan. Moving on to Chapter 6, Social and Community. This deals with the whole area of childcare and education, healthcare facilities, and then there's a section on planning for ageing and ageing in place. And there's various proposals there, including picking up on the 6 principles of housing options for our ageing population, which was published by the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government and the Department of Health in 2019. We've updates in relation to Cork County Age Friendly Programme and the Age Friendly Towns Initiative. We've updated guidance on the provision of ancillary family accommodation. Previously, the recreation and amenity, the open space standards were in this chapter. They have now been moved to recreation, to green infrastructure and recreation. Chapter 7 is marine, coastal and islands. And this is a new chapter again. And this is an area which is going to expand significantly over the lifetime of the plan. And I think the local authorities will have an expanded role in this area as various new plans are rolled out. There's an overview of national and regional marine policy. There'll be a planning and development marine bill, and there's a piece there on Cork Harbour and the island communities. And one of the key documents is that will be published this year is the National Marine Planning Framework, and this will be the equivalent of the National Planning Framework, so for terrestrial. So the proposal is to match the different policies on land with a similar suite of policies on the sea. So I think this is an area where there'll be a lot of policy initiatives over the next few years. In economic development, we set out the national and regional policy. We analysed the Cork economy and the job numbers and profiles. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be planning to deliver 36,000 jobs over the lifetime of the plan. That we have identified over 2,100 hectares of employment land, and that doesn't include lands within town centres and so on. So there's a significant amount of land identified for employment uses across the whole county, and that's set out in the employment network. We have a piece on each of our 4 strategic employment locations of Ringaskiddy, Little Island, Whitegate, Ahada and Carrigtwohill. There's policies on placemaking for enterprise, economic resilience, remote working and the circular economy. There's support for the rural economy, data centres, farm diversification, mineral extraction, forestry, fishing and so on. And this table here, our graph here, shows the main our jobs centre in the county is Little Island, followed by Mallow, followed by Ringaskiddy and Carrigtwohill, very close together, and then Middleton also very close, and all the way down. So we have a significant amount of jobs. I think it's over 96,000 jobs across the county, and 45% of those are located outside of the main urban areas. So there's a significant spread of our population, of our jobs across the county, which should add to the strength of the overall provision in the county. Town centres and retail. There's a specific focus on town centres beyond the retailing function and reinventing our town centres as dynamic places with a service, recreation, leisure and residential role too. We outlined the approach to town centres first approach. There's objectives on covering vacancy, regeneration, use of upper floors, residential use and derelict sites. And there's a suite of objectives for town centres, including town centres teams approach, the nighttime economy, farmers markets, targeted public realm strategies, and urban framework approach for towns with unique challenges. So we're trying to move away from a quantitative approach to retailing towards a qualitative approach and improving the wider aspects in the public realm and so on, and making our town centres more attractive places to live, work, and to retail in. So we're finalising a draft retail strategy, and this will form part of the amendments to the draft plan in due course and be included in the Chief Executive's report to elected members in the autumn. On the tourism front, we've updated the policies and trends as they were in the previous plan. We've a piece on marine leisure. We've identified the Cork tourism products and assets, and you'll see them there. Heritage tourism, cultural tourism, walking and cycling, greenways, and greenways have become particularly important. So we've a set of policies supporting the development of greenways. Rural tourism, tourism development and facilities, including accommodation, tourism potential for domains and estates. So there's policies on all those key areas. In the case of water management, the water management chapter considers the full water cycle. So everything to do with water management is now contained within this chapter. And so wastewater, water supply, surface water, flooding, and so on, they're all dealt with. Our sensitive water catchments, so this is the Blackwater, Dunmanway and Cork Harbour, how we deal with protect our surface water or groundwater from agricultural pollution and other pollution, and so on. It's all set out in this chapter. We provide details of the water service capacity of the main towns and key villages with population over 1,500 and objectives for water supply and wastewater disposal. We advocate the protection of the riparian zone and the use of SUDs as a means of managing surface water, and this chapter contains our policy in relation to flooding and acknowledges that an updated SFRA will be required. We carried out a strategic flood risk assessment of the draft plan, but unfortunately the most up-to-date maps didn't become available in time for us to use them. So we intend to rerun the strategic flood risk assessment using the most up-to-date maps on the OPW, and the outputs of that, including the flood maps, will form part of the Chief Executive's report and will be included as an amendment in the draft plan, to the draft plan. So that's just the table in chapter 11, setting out the current position with regard to water services and wastewater across the county. So chapter 12, transport and mobility, provides for the integration of land use and transport, acknowledges the need to shift to sustainable transport and specifically active travel to address climate change, uses the avoid shift improve framework to approach policy formulation, promotes the 10-minute town and livable town concept, sets more modal shift targets for the main towns in the county, provides insights into the measures being developed or supported by the Council in advancing active travel measures, cycleways, pedestrian connectivity, permeability, greenways, and there's policies in relation to rail, bus and park and ride. Also there's policies on mobility hubs, carpooling, remote working, EV charging and water-based transport. Our parking standards are outlined in this chapter, and they're broadly the same as the current approach. We support for strategic road infrastructure such as the N25, N22, N28 and N20 and so on. Policies on rail, road, freight and ports, and the potential role of Merino Point is highlighted. The Port of Cork and supports for the relocation of port activities, and Ringaskiddy as the preferred location for that relocated port activity. There's also a piece in Cork Airport. So while the airport is now within the city boundary, a lot of the safety and noise zones are still in the county area. On the energy and telecommunications chapter, we set out the broad policy in relation to energy overall. We look at the and take account of the draft revised wind energy development guidelines 2019. We propose no change to the areas where wind energy is acceptable in principle, open to consideration and normally discouraged. And wind energy is facilitated across 55% of the county, with 45% unlikely to be suitable. We've new expanded policies and guidance on solar energy, bioenergy, hydrogen energy, gas storage, energy storage, renewable energy and transport, the Celtic interconnector, broadband and data centres. On the Chapter 14, Green Infrastructure and Recreation, we've changed our approach. What was previously called open space in our plans is now called green infrastructure. And we set out the county-wide green infrastructure framework. We set out the principles for green and blue infrastructure, which will allow for the mainstreaming of the green infrastructure concept into many different areas and projects across the county. We outlined the approach to green infrastructure at both the settlement level, highlighting principal areas and identifying opportunities. We have a green infrastructure diagram for all our main towns. At the development level, to protect and manage and enhance our green infrastructure, and the submission of a green infrastructure statement with housing and employment developments. We set out the recreation amenity policy. The interim policy is carried forward, and we have objectives for public and private open space provision. And then the landscape policies, views and prospects, scenic routes, etc. are also contained in this chapter. And this diagram here gives a useful snapshot of the advantages and the importance of green infrastructure. You know, it's not but as an amenity, but also for biodiversity and also for flood management, amongst many other things. And as we've all discovered over the last 12 months, amenities in our local area are critically important, and even more critically important over the last 12 months. And we've a lot of us, we've all discovered new amenities that we didn't know existed on our doorstep, which was at least one positive from recent events. Biodiversity and the environment provides for the protection and enhancement of biodiversity, including but not limited to Natura 2000 sites. We support the principle of no net biodiversity loss, as well as more general objectives on species and habitats, and it contains specific policy in relation to invasive alien species, trees and woodlands. There's a commitment to support communities and stakeholders in community-led initiatives, such as pollinator plans and so on, and there's a suite of policies relating to soil, air quality, noise, light emissions, contaminated land, waste prevention and management. Our built-in cultural heritage. Generally, this chapter is similar to the one in the 2014 plan, and we've updated where required. Existing sections have been expanded, in particular industrial and post-medieval archaeology. We've expanded sections on the battlefield, ambush and siege sites, and defensive installations. There's a new section on vernacular buildings, including a broad objective, and there's a new section on shop fronts, including an objective. We've included a piece on historic landscapes, and the section on place names has been expanded and now relates to townland boundaries and place names. Just to note that the natural heritage section, as you see, has moved to the Chapter 15 Biodiversity and Environment, and that's a change from the current draft or current county development plan. So climate action, this is a new chapter that wasn't in, and obviously it's one of the critically important issues that we're facing as a world and as a nation and as a county over the next, in particular over the next 8 years. This chapter provides for the statutory planning context for climate action, highlights Cork County Council's ongoing climate action commitments, the Charter, the Adaptation Strategy, the Climate Action Regional Office, outlines the climate action strategy of the CDP, and there's a very useful table in this chapter that sets out how each chapter contributes to the delivery and addresses the issue of climate action. Support for decarbonisation zones in line with National Climate Action Plan, and there's an objective to undertake a local authority climate action plan as required. And that will be something we will have to do as a local authority sooner rather than later. Chapter 18, Zoning and Land Use. A number of new zoning objectives have been included. We have the vacant sites objectives. We have a new approach to existing built-up area. We split it into two. One is existing residential, and then there's existing mixed general business to reflect the largely residential areas, and then the largely employment areas. The open space objective has now been changed to green infrastructure, and there's 3 subcategories, and they're listed there as green recreation, green active, and green conservation. We have a new objective, ZU 310 for agriculture, and there's another new objective for residential reserve. And both of these are used to kind of manage the residentially zoned lands that we don't require for this plan period, but we may require for future plan periods or towards the end of this plan period. The enterprise zoning has been changed to high technology and campus development, and the business zoning has objects been changed to better reflect what actually is in these areas, and it's now called business and general employment. And in most cases, we've listed the appropriate use identified within those zoning objectives. So there's a box in this chapter that sets out those. So then implementation and delivery, and as we mentioned earlier, under the core strategy, implementation and delivery is critical. So we've a statutory obligation to set about implementing the policy objectives of the development plan. We're fully committed, and we'll actively undertake a leadership role to progress and secure development plan objectives. We'll adopt a collaborative approach, working with citizens, stakeholders, sectoral interests, and adjoining local authorities. Policy objectives often take a number of planned cycles to be realised, and that's something we need to note. And we intend to monitor the implementation and put in place a monitoring framework so that we can see and check and keep close eye on the delivery of the various objectives across the plan. But I suppose the key issue here is that we need the infrastructure stakeholders to deliver and to make the necessary investment so that we can achieve the population targets and jobs targets that we've set out for the county, and that have been set out for us by the MPF and the REIS. Moving on then to the Volume 2, Heritage and Amenity. This chapter sets out is generally similar to the previous Volume 2. The record of protected structures is set out in it, and we've added the RPS from the 9 town council town development plans have now been added. So that's an additional 1,493 RPSs have been added. We are proposing a further 16 to be added as part of this process as well, and they're set out there on page 146. We have also added the architectural conservation areas that were in the 9 town council development plans. They've been added, and they're all listed on page 150. There's a list of SACs, all the SPAs, NHAs, PNHAs, and so on, and geological sites. There's a list of scenic routes, record of protected structures, architectural conservation, as I mentioned already. So they're all set out and listed in the Volume 2. Moving on then to Volume 3, the North Cork settlements. I'm not going to go through the individual settlements because we don't have time here now. But as I said earlier, the Volume 3 North Cork has policies and objectives and a zoning map and a development boundary map for all of the settlements in the Fermoy Municipal District and the Clonturk Municipal District. Similarly, Volume 4 does South Cork settlements and so on, Carrigaline MD, Cove MD, East Cork MD, and the Macroom MD. So all the settlements have the zoning maps. If you're looking for the zoning maps, they're within the respective volumes 3, 4, and 5 under the respective municipal districts. And Volume 5 then, as I say, is Banning-Kinsale Municipal District and the West Cork MD. Volume 6 sets out the environmental reports, because the draft plan was subject to SEA, SFRA, and Habitats Directive Screening Assessment and Tour Impact Report. So just to Volume 7 then is the draft Cdp Map Browser. The aim of the map browser is to give the public access to large-scale detailed development plan policy map versions of all the key small-scale policy maps contained in the development plan, Volume 1, main policy material, provide information on the important heritage and environmental features listed in Volume 2, and provide settlement level information including land use zoning maps contained in Volumes 3, 4, and 5 of the plan. And this allows the public to be better informed about the policies contained in the plan and how they affect the county. So if you go into Volume 7 on the website, and you press the Cdp Map Browser, you will get access to all the different layers and things. You can switch them on and off, and it's a very useful tool and gives a lot of detailed information. So next steps I've already gone through. The key date coming up is midnight on Thursday the 1st of July for the end of the public consultation. So as I said earlier, get your submissions in as soon as possible to us. The amendments then, the Chief Executive report on the submissions will go to the members end of September. And as I said earlier, the members will consider those into December. And then we're back with a public consultation on the amendments in mid-January. Another Chief Executive's report, consideration of that from March through to April. And then Monday, the 25th of April, the members adopt a plan. And the new Cork County Development Plan comes into effect 6 weeks after it's adopted on the 6th of June 2022. So I'll just leave up this making a submission just to remind people of how to go about it, the timeline, the website, or in writing, and the fact that we can't accept email submissions, and that all submissions that are made will be available for everyone to view within 10 working days. So I think that brings my presentation to a conclusion. I'd just like to thank you for staying with us through this, and I think we may have some questions, hopefully with some questions, and we'll try and answer those now over the next 20 minutes or so. Thanks very much. Patricia, have we some questions?
Hi, Padraig. Yes, I have been, we've had quite a few, and I have been answering most of them actually in the chat.
Right, great.
There is one here that I haven't answered yet, which is in relation to investment in transport.
Right.
And that's probably a bit of a movable feast, I guess. I'm not sure that we have a specific answer to it.
Yeah, I suppose on that we set out a very detailed approach to especially active travel and sustainable transport, and we are accessing funds through our traffic and transport section to try and deliver those, to deliver pedestrian and cycleways and greenways and so on across the county, while also improving our road network. So there is a lot of work ongoing, and there's a lot of work being done to access funding through the URDF, the RRDF, and working in partnership with NTA and TII to try and deliver the transport infrastructure, and also working obviously with Bus Éireann and Irish Rail. And Irish Rail play a very important role, particularly in metropolitan Cork, in providing public transport facilities. So there's quite a lot going on there and is ongoing, and we're getting continue to seek support from the various statutory providers in that area.
That's it.
All right. Yeah, and I suppose if anyone else have a question, and the contact details were up on the slide. The other thing to say, and Elaine will probably reiterate this in a few minutes, is that we will make the presentation available to everyone. It'll be on the website, and any of the questions and our responses we'll also publish those, and they'll be available in a few days on the website as well under stage 2. So if you scroll down the bottom of the web page, you'll see the presentation and so on. And if there's no other questions, I might hand back to Elaine to finish up, and just to say thanks very much for taking part in the webinar. And if there's any other questions as we go along towards the 1st of July, you have our contact details, and we're happy to assist people and advise people as to the policies and how to go about making a submission and so on. Over to you, Elaine.
That's great. Thanks very much, Padraig. I think it's fair to say you covered a lot of ground there. And as you say, we're happy to answer questions, so just stay in touch. The recording and the Q&A will be available on the webpage in the coming days, as well as a copy of the presentation as well. So I suppose just on behalf of the PPU, I just want to say thanks for attending and for engaging with us today. And thanks to the Chief Executive and Padraig for their contribution. And we look forward to receiving your submissions by the 1st of July. So thanks and take care.